My name is Liam Carter. I'm 29, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in East Nashville, Tennessee. About 6 blocks from a coffee shop I've been meaning to try for 8 months and still haven't. I work as a freelance audio engineer, mostly mixing tracks for independent artists and doing sound design for a handful of podcast studios that are too small to hire full-time. It's the kind of job where your office is wherever your laptop is, and your most productive hours are usually somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning when the rest of the world has gone quiet. I have exactly one person I call when something happens. Good news, bad news, weird news, no news at all. Her name is Brooke Hartley. She's 28, works as a physical therapist at a sports rehab clinic in Midtown, and she has been my closest friend since the second week of sophomore year at Belmont University. When she sat down next to me in a music theory class she was only taking as an elective and proceeded to correct the professor on a minor point about chord inversions. She was right. The professor knew it. Half the class laughed. I turned and looked at her like she was someone I needed to know. That was 7 years ago. We've been through a lot since then. Apartments flooded, jobs lost, family stuff that neither of us talks about in detail, but that we were there for each other through anyway. When my dad had his first cardiac event 3 years ago, and I drove to Memphis in the middle of the night not knowing what I was going to find, Brooke stayed on the phone with me the entire 4-hour drive. She didn't sleep. She just talked. About nothing, about everything, just so I wouldn't be alone in the car. When her relationship with a guy named Todd ended badly, and it ended very badly. I took 2 days off work and we drove to the Smoky Mountains and hiked until she stopped looking like someone who was actively holding herself together with both hands. People assume things about us. They always have. Coworkers, old classmates, anyone who sees us together for more than 20 minutes. We get the looks, the raised eyebrows, the smirks. Her clinic receptionist once introduced her to a new patient and said, "This is Brooke. She's great. Her boyfriend's an audio guy." Brooke smiled and didn't correct her. I found out later and didn't know what to do with that information, so I filed it somewhere I didn't look very often. We're not together. We've never been. I have told myself that so many times it no longer requires conscious effort. It just runs in the background, like a program I forgot I installed. The night that changed everything started the way a lot of nights do lately. I went on a date. Her name was Jess. She was a marketing coordinator, pretty in a very put-together way, and she had mentioned 3 times in our text conversation before meeting that she really valued ambition in a partner. That detail didn't fully register until we were actually sitting across from each other at a wine bar on 12th Avenue South, and she asked, within the first 30 minutes, whether I saw freelancing as a long-term plan or endstone to something more stable. I said I saw it as a career. She smiled, like she was trying to be supportive about something she found disappointing. We stayed through the entrees because I am too polite for my own good. I walked her to her car, said something about doing this again that we both understood was not a promise, and drove home with that particular hollow feeling I've started associating with Tuesday evenings. I was inside my apartment with my shoes off and my jacket on the floor before I'd even made a conscious decision to call Brooke. She picked up on the third ring, sitting cross-legged on her bed, with her hair down and a cup of tea on the nightstand. She was wearing the gray university sweatshirt she's had since junior year, with the small bleach stain on the left sleeve she refuses to throw away. She took one look at my face and said, "Already?" She asked about my 5-year financial plan before the bread arrived. Brooke pulled her knees up to her chest and tried not to smile. "Liam." "I know. You keep doing this to yourself." "I know. These apps are not built for people like you." She reached for her tea. "They're built for people who can summarize themselves in a bio and mean it." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. "Maybe I just need better photos." "Your photos are fine. Your photos are not the problem." "Then what's the problem?" She opened her mouth and then closed it, just for a second. A small pause that I noticed and immediately forgot because I was already moving on to complaining about the wine bar's playlist, which had been aggressively upbeat in a way that felt like an insult to everyone trying to have an actual conversation. We talked for close to 2 hours, the usual rhythm. She told me about a patient who had come in, convinced his rotator cuff was torn, and turned out to have muscle tension from sleeping on a secondhand mattress. I told her about a mixing session that ran 4 hours over because the artist kept changing their mind about the reverb on the vocals. We talked about her sister's new apartment in Chattanooga and whether either of us was going to make it to Grant and Felicity's housewarming next month, and what we thought was actually in the breakfast burritos from the truck on Charlotte Avenue that somehow never had a line despite being the best thing within a 3-mile radius. It felt like breathing. It always does with Brooke. Around 11:30, she yawned and stretched her arms over her head. "I have a 7 a.m. patient," she said. "A high school soccer kid who tears something every 6 months like it's a hobby." "Go sleep," I said. "Thanks for listening again." She smiled at the camera. Always. Then she tilted her head slightly, the way she does sometimes, like she's weighing whether to say something. Whatever it was, she didn't say it. "Good night, Liam." Night, Brooke. I watched her reach for the laptop to end the call. The screen flickered and went dark, then came back. I figured it was a connection hiccup. I was reaching to close my own laptop when I heard her voice again, but different. Directed somewhere else. Off to the side. Like she'd set the laptop down and hadn't realized it was still running. Her roommate, Danny, must have come in from the hallway. I could hear the creak of the bedroom door. I should have closed the laptop. I know that. I knew it in that moment. I didn't. Danny's voice came through clearly. "How'd he seem?" Brooke sighed, the specific tired kind of sigh that carries more than the person intends. "He's fine. Bad date, same as usual." "And you just listened." "Of course." A short pause. "Brooke, don't." "I'm not doing anything. I'm just standing here." "You're using your voice." "My very neutral voice." Brooke didn't answer. I heard the sound of her setting something down. The tea mug, probably. Danny spoke again, quieter this time. "You know what I noticed the other night when the three of us got dinner? The way you watch him when he's not looking. You think I can't tell, but I've lived with you for 2 years." Silence. "You could just tell him." "Danny, what's the actual worst that happens?" Brooke's voice came out slower than usual, careful, like she was choosing each word the way you choose your footing on something unstable. "The worst that happens is I lose him. Not just romantically. I lose the person I talk to every day. I lose the person who drove to Memphis with me when my mom was in the hospital. I lose 7 years of someone who knows me better than anyone else." A pause. "I can't risk that, so I stay where I am. And it's fine." "Brooke, I mean it. I've been doing this for a long time. I know how to be fine." I had stopped breathing at some point. I didn't know when. My hands were sitting on the keyboard doing nothing. The apartment felt very still. Then, before I could process any of what I was doing, I heard my own voice come out of my speakers. "Brooke." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever experienced. I heard Danny inhale sharply. I heard Brooke make a sound that wasn't a word. Then there was movement, fast, and her face filled the frame, looking like someone had knocked the floor out from under her. "You're still on?" Her voice was barely there. "Yeah." For a full 2 seconds, she didn't move. Then she reached forward and the screen went black. I sat in my apartment and didn't move for a long time. The rain was doing what Nashville rain does in October, indecisive, starting and stopping, like it couldn't commit. My laptop fan was running. Somewhere outside a car alarm went off and then stopped. I sat in all of it and let the replay run on a loop. I lose the person who drove to Memphis with me. I know how to be fine. 7 years. I had spent 7 years noticing things I then carefully unnoticed. The way she always positioned herself slightly toward me in group settings. The way she remembered things I mentioned once in passing months later, the name of an album I liked, a restaurant I wanted to try, the specific thing I said about my dad that one night in the car. The way she laughed at my jokes even when they weren't quite landing. Not in a forced way, but in the way someone laughs when they're just genuinely glad you're there. I told myself all of that was friendship. That's what I called it every time. And it worked because I needed it to. Because the alternative was terrifying. The alternative was saying something real and watching the thing we had built over 7 years become fragile. And fragile things break. So I didn't say anything, and apparently neither did she, and we were both, apparently, fine. My phone lit up. A text from an unknown number for a second before I realized it was Danny. Brooke had texted from Danny's phone. "She's not okay, just so you know." Then, 30 seconds later from Brooke's own number, "I'm sorry you heard that. You weren't supposed to." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I typed, "I know. Can I come over?" 3 minutes passed. Then, "It's almost midnight." "I know." Another pause. Longer. Okay. The drive to her apartment in Germantown takes 11 minutes when there's no traffic. That night, with the rain and every single light on Gallatin Avenue turning red the moment I approached it, it took closer to 25. I spent most of it not listening to anything, just the wipers and the rain and my own breathing, which I kept having to deliberately slow down. I thought about the night she showed up at my door with a six-pack and a very bad action movie the week I lost my biggest client and didn't want to talk about it. She didn't make me talk about it. She just sat with me. I thought about how she always seed me on the good apartment listings even though she knew I wasn't looking, just because she'd think Liam might like this view. I thought about the week after Todd, up in the mountains, when she was quiet for a long stretch on one of the trails, and I just walked next to her and didn't say anything, and that seemed to be exactly what was needed. I thought about how I had filed all of those things somewhere I didn't look very often, and how full that place had apparently gotten without my noticing. I parked on the street and sat in the car for a minute, watching the rain move in sheets across the windshield, trying to figure out what exactly I was about to do. Then I got out and walked to the door. Danny answered before I knocked. She looked me up and down. Rain-damp hair, jacket still on, probably an expression on my face that gave away more than I intended. "She's in the living room," Danny said. Then, quietly, before she stepped aside, "7 years is a long time to be brave enough to love someone and not say it. Don't make it 8. I didn't answer. I walked past her. Brooke was standing near the window, with her arms wrapped around herself, which is what she does when she's trying to contain something. She was still in the gray sweatshirt. Her hair was down, a little messy, and she was looking at me with the specific expression of someone who has been caught doing something private and is not sure whether to be relieved or devastated. Neither of us spoke. The apartment was quiet except for the rain against the windows. "You didn't have to come," she said finally. "Yes, I did." She shook her head slightly. "Liam, it's late. You heard something you weren't supposed to hear, and now you feel responsible and—" "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" I ran a hand through my wet hair. "Because for 7 years I've been doing the same thing you've been doing, and I'm tired of it." She went still. "Every time a date goes badly," I said, "I call you, and I've told myself it's because you're my best friend, and that's what you do with a best friend. But the real reason, the reason I've been careful not to look at too closely, is that talking to you for 2 hours always feels more like what I actually want than anything that happened on the date. And I've spent a long time pretending I didn't know why." Brooke looked at the floor. Her jaw was tight. "I compare everyone to you," I continued. "I've been doing it for years, and I kept telling myself I was just being difficult, just hadn't met the right person yet. But the truth is, I already know what the right person feels like. It feels like this, like you. And I've been too scared to say that out loud because I knew that if I was wrong about how you felt, I'd lose everything. And if you were right?" Her voice came out quiet. "I was hoping tonight answered that question." She looked up. Her eyes were red. "You really didn't know before tonight." "I suspected. I didn't let myself know." "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It's not. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you carried that alone. I'm sorry I was always calling you about the wrong people while you were sitting there doing what you do, which is be exactly the person I actually want to talk to." She uncrossed her arms. "This is a lot to process at midnight." "I know. I can go if you want. But I wanted to say it in person, not through a screen you forgot to turn off." Something shifted in her face at that. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. She pressed her lips together like she was trying to contain it. "That's a terrible thing to joke about," she said. "I'm not joking." She looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look where you can feel the other person actually deciding something, not just reacting. "I've wanted to say something for a long time," she said. "I kept telling myself the timing was wrong, or you weren't ready, or I wasn't sure enough. But the truth is I was scared. Same as you." "Same as me," I said. "So what do we do now?" I took a step toward her. "We stop pretending the word friend is the most accurate word we've got." She looked at me for another second. Then she let out a long breath, and the tension in her shoulders dropped just slightly, like something she'd been holding finally became safe to put down. I crossed the remaining distance between us, and she didn't step back. When I kissed her, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the way it happens in movies where everything is urgent and cinematic. It was slow and quiet, the way something feels when it's been true for a long time, and is finally being said out loud. Her hand came up to my jacket lapel, not pulling me in, just holding on. My forehead dropped to hers afterward. We both stayed there, not saying anything, for a long moment. From the hallway, I heard Danny's bedroom door close with careful, deliberate quietness. I've wanted to do that since the night you stayed on the phone with me for 4 hours driving to Memphis, I said. Brooke let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. I've wanted you to do that since the night in the mountains when you just walked next to me and didn't try to fix anything. We're idiots, I said. The biggest, she agreed. We stood there for a while in the middle of her living room, rain still going outside, neither of us in any hurry to figure out what came next. What came next turned out to be gradual, the way honest things usually are. We didn't have a conversation that formally defined anything. We didn't sit down and make a plan. It just started happening in the way that felt natural once we'd stopped preventing it. I drove her to the clinic one morning when her car was in the shop and ended up staying in the waiting room for 40 minutes because the patient ran over, and I genuinely didn't want to leave. She texted me a photo of a used vinyl she found at a shop in East Nashville with the caption, "Yours if you want it," and I did want it, and when I picked it up, I stayed for 3 hours. Small things, accumulating in the quiet way that mattered things tend to. Her mom called one evening in late November when we were both at my apartment. I could hear the call from across the room without trying to. The particular brightness in her mother's voice that meant she was asking questions rather than making statements. Brooke glanced at me, then back at the phone. "Yes, Mom," she said. "His name is Liam." A pause. "Yes, that Liam." Another pause. I watched Brooke's face do several things in quick succession. "About 7 years," she said, and then, to my complete surprise, she smiled, not an embarrassed smile, a real one. "I know. We figured it out eventually." She hung up and looked at me. "Your mom's known for a while?" I asked. "Since about year 3, Brooke said. She never said anything because she thought it was obvious and assumed I'd handle it." Year 3. I know. I looked at her. "I would like to formally apologize to your mother." Brooke laughed, the real kind, the kind that takes over her whole face, and for a second I just sat there looking at her, thinking about how many times I'd heard that laugh and how absurd it was that I'd needed 7 years and an accidental phone call to do something about it. Things were not perfectly smooth, they never are. There was a week in December where we snapped at each other twice in 3 days about nothing, really. I said something thoughtless about her work schedule when she was already stressed. She pushed back on something about how I handled a client situation when I hadn't asked for input. Small friction, the kind that happens when two people who know each other too well stop being careful. We didn't speak properly for almost 2 days. She texted first. "I think I was taking other things out on you. I'm sorry." I called her immediately. I was doing the same thing. "We're going to have to get better at this," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We are. I'm not good at letting someone see me be bad at things." "I know. I've watched you pretend to be fine for 7 years." A pause. "That's fair." "We'll figure it out," I said. "We've been figuring things out together for a while. This is just another version of that." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, and then quietly, "I really am sorry." "Me too." We figured it out. The harder thing came in February. Her dad called her on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and she was on the couch, with her legs tucked under her, and I could tell within 30 seconds from the quality of her silence that this was not a routine call. She was listening more than talking. Her face was doing the thing where she keeps it very neutral to compensate for whatever the thing is she's actually feeling. After she hung up, she sat for a minute without saying anything. Then she told me. Her father had been managing a small landscaping business out of Knoxville for over 20 years, residential and commercial accounts. A crew of 8, everything built from scratch. He'd been having some health problems over the past year, nothing catastrophic, but enough that he couldn't work the hours he used to. Her older brother had zero interest in the business. Her dad had called to talk through options, selling it, finding a manager, or something else. "What's the something else?" I asked. She looked at me. "He's not asking me to come home." He was careful to say that, but I could hear it in everything he didn't say. I sat down next to her. "Do you want to go?" "I love my dad," she said. "I love what he built. I know that business. I grew up going to job sites after school. I know his accounts, and I know his crew, and I know what it would mean to him to have someone keep it in the family. She stopped. But I have a life here. I have a job I love and friends, and she looked at me. And this. And I'm not willing to treat all of that as something I can just put down. What if you didn't have to choose entirely? I said. She tilted her head. You've been managing patient relationships and building long-term treatment plans for years, I said. That's operations. That's client management. What if you helped him build a system, the scheduling, the client communication, the back end, something that could run with the right people in place, and you could oversee it remotely? Check in a couple times a month. Fly up when something needs hands-on attention. She was quiet for a moment. That would take time to set up. So we take the time. She looked at me steadily. You said we. I did. Why? Because it's your dad's business, and it matters to you. And things that matter to you are things I want to help with. That's not complicated. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt her exhale slowly. I need to go up there, she said. A few days. See him, see the operation, figure out what's actually needed. Okay. Will you be all right while I'm gone? I looked at her. I think I can manage a few days. She smiled into my shoulder. I know you can, I just like asking. She drove to Knoxville on a Thursday. I stayed in Nashville and worked and was more aware of the apartment's dimensions than I usually am. Her jacket was on the hook by the door. Her current book was face down on the coffee table. The coffee she preferred was in the cabinet even though I don't drink it. On Friday night, she called me from the kitchen of her parents' house, which I recognized from the time I'd visited for Thanksgiving the year before. The yellow tile backsplash, the window above the sink that looks out at the backyard. Her dad appeared briefly in the background, moving slowly, but he waved when he saw me on the screen and said something that made Brooke turn pink in a way I found extremely charming. What did he say? I asked after he left. He said you have honest eyes, she said. That's high praise from him. And what did you say? I said I know. She paused. He wants to meet you properly, he said anytime. I looked at her. Tell him soon. She smiled. A real one, the kind that makes her eyes do the thing. I will. On Saturday, she had the conversation with her dad. She called me that evening and walked me through it. The whole picture. She was going to help him build out a proper operations structure, digitize the client management system, get the scheduling under control, and help find and vet a strong site manager who could handle the day-to-day. She'd consult remotely and come up monthly until things were stable. He cried a little, she said. He tried to hide it. Sounds like someone else I know. I don't cry at things. Brooke, the end of Interstellar. That's different. That movie is designed to make people cry. It's basically a trap. I laughed, and she laughed, and the distance between us didn't feel like much. She came back on a Sunday evening. I heard her key in the lock and was in the kitchen and made myself stay there and not go to the door like a dog, which required moderate effort. She came in dragging her bag, dropped it in the hallway, and walked into the kitchen. Hi, she said. Hi. She looked around the kitchen like she was taking a small inventory. Then she looked at me. I thought about something the whole drive back, she said. What? That I kept thinking of this place as where I was coming back to. Not just my apartment or Nashville. Here specifically. She set her keys on the counter. That felt like important information. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, I've been thinking about asking you something. She raised an eyebrow. Your lease is up in April. She tilted her head slowly. It is. Mine's a month to month. I know. This apartment is bigger, I said. Better light. The breakfast burrito truck is 3 blocks closer. That is a genuinely compelling argument, she said. And she was smiling now, the kind that she tries to keep contained and never quite can. You've been leaving things here for months, I said. Your jacket is on my hook. Your book is on my table. The coffee you drink is in my cabinet even though I don't drink it. I keep almost texting you things and then remembering you're not home, and then remembering that home might just be a question of what we decide. She was quiet. I'm not saying it has to be right now, I said. I'm saying I want you to know the door is open. For real, not accidentally. She looked at me for a long moment. The same kind of look as the night in her living room, the one that meant she was actually deciding, not just reacting. Then she crossed the kitchen, picked up the coffee from the cabinet, and held it up. I'm going to need a bigger drawer, she said. I took the coffee out of her hand, set it back on the shelf, and kissed her. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't complicated. It was just right. Her lease was up in April. By March, she'd moved the rest of her things in. There was no ceremony, no big romantic gesture. Just two people carrying boxes up a staircase and arguing lovingly about whether the bookshelf should go on the east wall or the west wall, and discovering that sharing a bathroom with someone you actually like is an entirely different experience than it would seem. She was messier than I expected, in the specific way of someone whose work life is highly organized and whose personal space is therefore allowed to be not. Design samples and anatomy diagrams and half-read articles printed out and annotated in different colored pens. I stayed up later than she preferred and sometimes ate cereal for dinner over the sink when I was in the middle of something and forgot that meals were a concept. We had small arguments about the thermostat, about the dishes, about how I said, "It's fine," when I meant I'm annoyed, and she said, "I'll figure it out," when she meant I need help and don't want to ask for it. We got better at those things gradually, the way you get better at most things, imperfectly, with repetition. One night in May, we were sitting on the kitchen floor eating takeout because the dining table had been commandeered by her laptop and 3 clipboards full of notes for her dad's business. The new client system was finally up and running, and her dad's site manager had just completed his second full week, and she looked up at me with a noodle halfway to her mouth and said, "I think this is actually working." I looked at her. "Your dad's thing?" "All of it." I looked around the kitchen, the table covered in her work, my recording equipment in the corner of the second room, the bookshelf on the east wall, which is where we both eventually agreed it belonged, the coffee in the cabinet, the specific pattern of how our things had accumulated together until the space stopped being mine and started being ours. "Yeah," I said, "I think it is." She went back to her noodles. I went back to mine. Later that night, she was wrapping up a call with her dad's site manager, a quick check-in, everything on track, and she had her laptop propped on the coffee table, the camera facing her. When she ended the call, she looked at the screen for a second and then looked at me. "Webcam's off this time," she said. I smiled. "Glad you checked." She closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch cushions. "I don't have anything to hide anymore anyway." "No?" I said. "Say it then." She looked at me, unhurried, the way she does most things now. "I love you," she said, "and I picked this." I reached over and took her hand. "I love you too," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Outside, Nashville was doing what it does in May. Warm enough to have the windows open, the sound of the neighborhood coming through in small, ordinary pieces. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing music. A dog was barking at something that probably didn't deserve it. The city carried on, indifferent and familiar. And in a kitchen with a bookshelf on the east wall and 2 kinds of coffee in the cabinet, that was enough. More than enough. It was the whole thing. There's a version of this story where I never hear that voice memo, where I close the laptop 2 seconds earlier, go to bed, and wake up the next morning, still safely convinced that what Brooke and I had was just friendship. I've thought about that version a lot. It's not a comfortable thing to sit with, the idea that the most important turning point in my life came down to a technical glitch and my own hesitation to close a screen. But I don't think that's actually the whole truth. I think the honest version is that I already knew. Not in a way I could have written down or said out loud, but in the way you know things you've decided not to look at directly. Every time I called Brooke after a bad date, every time I measured some new person against her without meaning to, every time she tilted her head like she was about to say something and then didn't, and I noticed and filed it somewhere quiet. That wasn't ignorance. That was fear wearing the mask of ignorance. What I've come to understand is that the accident, the forgotten voice memo, the open line, didn't create anything. It just removed the excuse I'd been using to avoid what was already there. And the reason I was using that excuse was not stupidity. It was the particular kind of cowardice that looks like caution. The kind that tells you protecting what you have is wisdom, when really it's just a way of not risking anything real. The thing about Brooke that I keep coming back to is that she was doing the same thing, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway. She kept showing up. She kept answering on the third ring. She kept being the person I called when something mattered. That took something I don't have a small word for, the willingness to stay close to something that cost her every single time because she valued the connection more than she valued her own comfort. That's not passivity. That's a kind of integrity I had to earn my way toward understanding. And when the moment came, when there was no more hiding behind the word friend, I had to decide, quickly and with no preparation, who I actually was. Whether I was the person who would go over there in the rain at midnight, or the person who would send a text and wait for morning. I chose to go. Not because I was certain it would work out, because I was more afraid of the version of myself that stayed home. What I know now, living in an apartment with a bookshelf on the east wall and two kinds of coffee in the cabinet, is that the good things in life don't usually arrive through grand gestures or perfect timing. They arrive because someone, or two people, kept showing up honestly, kept doing the right thing even when it was inconvenient, and finally found the nerve to say what was true out loud. Brooke figured out a way to help her dad without abandoning the life she'd built. I learned that love isn't the absence of fear. It's just the decision that something matters more than the fear does. That's what I'd want anyone watching this to take away. Not the romance of it, the actual mechanics. The daily choice, to be honest. The discipline to stay present for someone even when it's uncomfortable. The courage to say the true thing when saying nothing would be so much easier. The webcam turned off on its own the second time. She didn't need to hide anything anymore. Neither did I.